Hi, I'm Dave Dienstag, and I am Giselle.org. I'm addressing these remarks to the guys at Duran, Alex, and Peter. You're excellent. Thank you very much for the work you've been doing. I found it to be most informative. I have some comments to make generally on coverage of Afghanistan and Pakistan and South Asia and the region, because reportage from the region is just appalling. And it's not your fault, really, because the frame of reference, the entire frame of reference, has been skewed to isolate these narrow parochial visions of the war in Afghanistan so that you come up with no solutions. You give people not enough information to figure out solutions, to look at the situation critically, and people just end up repeating the same tired, stale phrases. In order to analyze the situation, you have to look at Afghanistan's neighbors, chief among them Pakistan. You can't talk about Afghanistan without talking about Pakistan, and you can't talk about the Taliban, especially, without talking about Pakistan. It is Pakistan who the United States has been fighting chiefly through the Taliban for all of these 20 years. I have said so all along. I knew so from day one. I have a lot of experience in the region, and it's been a deliberate effort by the United States government to cover this fact up. But the fact is, the Taliban are an extension of American foreign policy. There's no getting around that. They always were. Whatever else the Taliban is, and we can go round and round about that, chauvinist Pashtun organization, extremist Deobandis, blah, 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 blah. We can do this. But why? The number one reason they still exist is the foreign policy of Pakistan, which is being determined by the ISI and the army of Pakistan. Okay? And if you don't talk about that with respect to Pakistan, if you talk about Afghanistan without respect to Pakistan, you're wasting your own time and everybody else's. And the proof is in what happened in the Doha talks. Zalmai Khalilzad had to shuttle to Pakistan, to GHQ, and talk to the army at every stage of the so-called negotiations in Doha, because that's who he was really talking to. And then he'd go back. And by the way, there was nothing that the delegates to Doha from the Taliban could do without permission from Pakistan. And that was pretty much known by everybody. And you'll hear this from Taliban in the field. They're like, yeah, they're these guys, they're negotiating for us, but we don't know who they are. We never heard of these guys before. Some of them they have, but, Baradar and people like that. But by and large, it came out of nowhere. And a lot of Taliban are very, very suspicious about this because of what happened with Omar. Mullah Omar was dead for at least 3 years before it was announced by Pakistan, oh, by the way, he's dead. And the Taliban suddenly realized, we're being used here. So a discussion about Afghanistan without mentioning Pakistan is a waste of time. I mean, just don't even bother talking about this subject without talking about Pakistani intentions. Afghanistan. Afghanistan, as we know it, since the Bonn Agreement, was a rigged game set up to fail, essentially, by Zalmai Khalilzad. And I'm sorry, it sounds like a very strong statement, but look what happened. This is also something that I said from the beginning. I remember seeing Mr. Karzai talking at Georgetown University, and he went on for a long time. I think it was like 3 hours he spoke. He spoke in Pashto, he spoke in Dari, and he spoke in English, and he promised women's rights and everything else under the sun. And I walked out of that room going, oh my God, how's this guy going to pull this off? I couldn't believe it. They made a lot of promises. They never, ever believed they were going to keep those promises. They could not have. They're serious guys. They know what they can and they can't do. And they knew how to be a politician. Make a lot of promises as if you're throwing up a bunch of balls in the air, and maybe you'll catch a few when they come down. But that's the best they could ever have done, and they all know it. Um, uh, the failure, the obvious sign of failure for the Bonn Agreement was the fact that they made a strongly centralized government based in Kabul. Afghanistan doesn't work that way. Afghanistan is the greatest working anarchy on the planet. And by the way, I didn't make that sentence up. It was made up by the Louis Dupre, who, when he was alive, was the foremost authority in America on Afghanistan. I knew him and I worked with him. He spoke at a conference I organized when I was a kid. He was a wonderful man. Uh, the countryside doesn't need the government. An old lady was once asked, who does she prefer to become the president of Pakistan? And she said, we don't care if they elect a stick to be the head of Afghanistan. Just leave us alone. The villages out in the countryside just really want no part of Kabul. They want safety, they want security, yeah. But Kabul has never been able to guarantee that, whether it was a communist regime or this regime or the Taliban. It just isn't going to happen. And, if the United States were to pick up and leave Afghanistan altogether, which I'm kind of skeptical about, the fighting will not stop. It's my understanding as of this morning that some bombing missions have already been flown by the United States against the Taliban to protect some government troops somewhere out there. I'm really torn about this because I hate abandoning the government in Kabul. I know a lot of those people personally, and it's going to be really bad. But the other thing that I think everybody needs to look at is what just happened in India. The Trump visit to India could very well be a game changer. And the reason that I say that is that Mr. Trump didn't make a deal, as is so often characterized in the mainstream media. He basically put his stamp of approval on many deals that are being made between American industries and India. Those industries, by the way, are primarily defense industries, Boeing and people like that. And also in the energy sector, the Indians have agreed to buy coal, oil, and CNG, compressed natural gas. And energy is the name of the game for India. It's a big deal. It's a limiting factor on their ability to develop. So when that happened, what I think Mr. Trump may have done is to set up an economic relationship between the United States and India that will compete with the covert relationship, but a very real and big one, between the United States and Pakistan. And the thing that it is the thing that has kept the United States in Afghanistan for 20 years. Weapons sales. It's just that simple. Um, there are a variety of layers of other kinds of commercial endeavors that allegedly keep America glued there, are defined as American interests. Very dangerous phrase. But it is the arms trade that really kept Pakistan glued to the United States because they buy weapons, and they buy weapons with money that they get from the United States. I mean, USAID money, which disappears. There's no accounting for what happens to that money. And I have been trying to get people to notice this for years. And I think I'm the person responsible for getting Robin Rafel basically kicked out of the State Department because she was the chief engineer of a very corrupt relationship between the United States and Pakistan. And she is called Lady Taliban among Indian diplomats, for example, because she's the person most responsible for taking this obscure, half-mad sect and turning them into the force majeure that they are, if I use the right phrase. In any case, these are things that you have to talk about when you talk about the Afghan, quote-unquote, war. It's really wars. There are many layers of conflict there. And when and if the United States leaves, the war certainly will not be over because there's this other set of wars going on having to do with ethnicity and the neighboring countries and their concerns and appetites. And that's really what you have to analyze. Like, how big are those appetites? Well, certainly Pakistan is preeminent among them. Pakistan wants the most out of Afghanistan. They're ready to outright annex several of the provinces that are on their border, on the Duran line there. And it is their eastern border. It's often referred to the southern border. But if you look at the map, it's an east-west thing, not a north-south thing. And that part of the Duran line that runs through the Fatah and all of that sort of thing is no longer really a legal border, because the Duran line was an agreement that expired several years ago. It was signed by a British civil servant with some Pashto tribesmen, and it was set for 100 years. That time has expired. So the legality of the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan is very much ambiguous. And who takes advantage of that the most will determine the shape of what Afghanistan looks like in the future. Nobody talks about that. And the other aspect of this is the TAPI pipeline, which amazingly has survived. It is the stupidest idea. And of course, Robin Rafel is behind it because she's the queen of stupid ideas. It's as simple as this. It's the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline. The pipeline is, in other words, going through war-torn Afghanistan to carry energy to Pakistan and then allegedly on to India. If you think that's feasible, I will sell you oceanfront property in Nevada. But it is the source or the cause of a lot of money being spent. I mean, they've built annex, or the end of the pipeline in Turkmenistan is under construction, or it's been completed by now, I don't know. As if that pipeline is going to happen in Afghanistan, and I'll bet big money that it doesn't. I'm not entirely convinced that this so-called peace agreement is actually going to happen. I think that to a large extent what it is a fig leaf that is basically our ticket to the next train out of there. Look, we signed a peace agreement, we're gone, it's over, bye. That would be Trump style. And I hope it works. I really do. But I'm kind of skeptical. There are a lot of forces in the Pentagon and in the military-industrial complex that are not ready to say goodbye to Pakistan. They're big, they're very old, they're more than established. They're permanent fixtures of the landscape in the Department of State and the revolving door between State and K Street. And there's a great book, by the way, by a guy named Hussein Haqqani. He's a former diplomat from Pakistan, about the history of that. And you'll see that it's an institution now. And unless you get into that institution in the United States, dismantle it and scatter it to the winds, you're going to have this very, very powerful lobbying effort to keep America in Afghanistan for no good reason at all, other than their personal enrichment. Anyway, those are some comments that I wanted to make, and I hope that it provides you with a perspective to examine the Pakistan, Afghanistan wars and make more sense of what you're looking at. Because right now, what people are saying are a bunch of empty phrases, graveyard of empires, etc., etc. Those things are really not helpful at this point in the conversation. I mean, it would appeal to common sense that if you're going to get out, you just get out. The obstacles to getting out are in America, not Afghanistan. And that has to be remembered first and foremost. The corruption that everybody points to, that the conversation always nails the Afghans as being the source of corruption, is really wrong. The source of corruption is America first, Pakistan second, and then you have Afghans fighting over the scraps. That is really what's going on. And everybody just dumps on Afghanistan because it's easy. Everybody sort of matter-of-factly accepts it as if, yeah, well, they're the cause of it. They're not a cause. They are a symptom. That is, Afghan corruption is a symptom of much wider corruption. And I have that on authority of people who are Afghans, who are in the government, who I communicate with from time to time. I don't regularly because it's dangerous. And all of their communications are being monitored. Their foreign policy is run by the United States. If Afghanistan were to be running its foreign policy right now, they'd be sitting down and talking with Iran. But they're precluded from doing so by the United States. And they have to take the position that, Iran is our enemy because whatever. Iran's not Afghanistan's enemy. It just isn't. But because Afghanistan, the Kabul government at least, is propped up by the United States, they're forced to swallow an American foreign policy. Anyway, I threatened to stop this video. I really do, because it's gone on for too long. I want to keep it brief so you guys can have the rest of your days. Thanks if you're watching this. Thanks very much for listening. I'm Dave Dienstag. I am Giselle.org. It's my fault. Take care.